Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad. Tehami. Pakistan's fight against terrorism continues, and there had been a surge in the terrorist activities in the recent past, particularly in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Pakistan's top leadership has repeatedly expressed the resolve to defeat this menace of terrorism. Today, according to ISPR, 12 terrorists belonging to banned Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan were killed in intelligence-based operation in the Lucky Marwat area of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. At the same time, Pakistan's Foreign Office has also repeatedly said that Pakistan expects the interim Afghan authorities to fulfill their commitments and dismantle the TTP safe havens on the Afghan soil. We have seen at the same time during this resurgence of the new wave of terrorism in different parts of the country, international community, especially the major world powers, including the US and China, as well as the United Nations, have expressed support towards Pakistan to battle this particular menace and defeat it. Now, the US State Department spokesperson Ned Price, in his recent press briefing, has said that Pakistan would continue to be a stalwart partner of the US in the face of the horrific terror attacks. Earlier, we also saw that the US had offered unconditional support to Pakistan to deal with the threat of banned Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan. And there was also a provision in the current year's budget of the US of $15 million to enhance the security along the Pak-Afghan border. Meanwhile, Foreign Minister Bilal Bhutto Zardari has said Pakistan and the US will explore the possibilities of coordinating their efforts to combat terrorism next month during a counter-terrorism dialogue that would be held between the two countries. And he also said we once again need international coordination to combat terrorism. In today's show, we'll be talking about Pakistan's fight against terrorism and the need of better international coordination to defeat this menace. And we'll also try to look into the answer of this question. Isn't it the responsibility of the Afghan interim government, the Afghan Taliban, to engage themselves with the international community, especially when IS Khorasan, with its nexus with other terror groups, pose a serious threat to the regional stability and security in this particular region? We'll be having our guests for this particular show. We are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Asadullah Khan. He's expert in international affairs. Mr. Asadullah Khan, thank you very much for being with us at Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. And on Skype, we are being joined by Dr. Akhtar Shah, is former IGP Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Dr. Shah, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Let me begin the discussion with you, Mr. Khan. Today, there was an intelligence-based operation. According to the ISPR, 12 terrorists were killed in that particular operation. Shows that Pakistan's security forces remain to be quite vigilant, especially during this resurgence of the wave of terrorism in the country.
First of all, Tehami sir, thank you for having me on this very important issue, which is very much near to our national security. Yes, we are vigilant. We were vigilant in the past as well. The problem is that if you analyze what's happening in the terrorism trends of Pakistan, you'll have to start it from 2009, let's suppose, when we started first a full-fledged operation against the militants, starting from the Sawat operation and then moving forward. If you see the history, the historical pattern, 2010 was the particular year in which Pakistan faced more than 2,100 attacks in a single year. This is very important to mention here, that this was a huge number of attacks at that time, and terrorism, the gin of terrorism was like out of control in Pakistan. So fast forward to what happened, a tragic episode of APS in 2014, a national consensus was built. Every political party, everyone, the civil bureaucracy, the media, the civil society, everyone was on a single page. And then we drafted a national action plan. which was, a breakthrough. Later on, Operation Zarb-e-Azb complemented that national action plan. So, by blending soft power and hard power, soft power in the form of an action plan and the hard power, we were gaining successes, with such successes that a nosedive decline was observed in the terrorist attacks. And then there was a time that we were only having around 250 attacks to 300 attacks per year in 2018 and 19.
Now, when you talk about the statistics, according to the statistics which have been released by Pakistan Institute for Conflict and Security Studies, now this particular month of January 2023 remained one of the deadliest months since July 2018, as 134 people lost their lives, 139% spike in the terrorist activities. Now, of 44 militant attacks across the country just in a single month. So when we compare these statistics to the statistics of the year that you are mentioning over here, so what's the trend when there has been a resurgence now?
Yeah.
What went wrong when there was a national consensus in the form, the National Action Plan, NECTA was formed, and every stakeholder was on the same page?
Yes, that was I was about to come here. Look, what happened was the US hasty withdrawal from Afghanistan. We were terming it as a hasty withdrawal. Why? Because Pakistan believed that if the spaces, the ungoverned spaces, are left behind in Afghanistan, the elements like the troublemakers, the TTP, the Indian element, and few others, the splinter groups of TTP, they could have captured that vacuum. And unfortunately, that has
But for
happened.
that, there were assurances on the part of the Afghan Taliban that once they take over, according to the Doha peace deal, the commitments they made to the international community, look, we are going to secure the vast swathes of this particular war-ravaged country, and no militant outfit is going to be allowed to operate from Afghan soil.
Yes, there was assurances, but unfortunately, they were not able to influence the TTP as they should have. And we have observed that in the year 2022, the same institute that you are referring to, they have reported that we have observed 27% of increase in the terrorist attack in the year 2022. So this increase is, the 27% increase is a very significant increase in the terrorist-related incidents. But you can't term it the only fault on the Afghan Taliban or the Indian involvement. There are certain internal factors as well inside Pakistan. For example, our political instability, our weak economy. We are facing the weak economic situation in the country. So there are a few other factors.
I will be taking a look on these particular factors later in the show. Let me bring in Dr. Shah into the discussion also. Dr. Shah, today the ISPR says the 12 terrorists belonging to banned Tehrik-e-Taliban in Pakistan were killed during an intelligence-based operation. Earlier we saw there was a grand operation, counter-terrorism operation that was launched in the Makarwal area in Miawali also. So that speaks volumes that Pakistan security forces and law enforcement agencies remain to be vigilant in order to deal with this particular menace that has surfaced once again.
It appears to be that the decisions taken in the Apex Committee meeting presided over by the Prime Minister of Pakistan has started giving dividends, and now the sense of direction is very clear, and the policy has been, without mincing any words, the policy towards zero tolerance has been adopted. Now, the strategic point of the whole policy is that there would be zero tolerance towards terrorism. So in pursuance of that, it's essential to carry out targeted, which we also call intelligence-based operation, which we have witnessed last day in Miyawali, wherein 12 terrorists uh, uh, they have been killed, and according to the reports, they were Afghan-based terrorists who had links with the Taliban, which is based. The leadership is based in Afghanistan. So it is the beginning, and we hope that now it will be taken to logical conclusion. It's very, very important. At the same time, we have to also realize that, of course, this problem is not only a localized problem confined to a particular district or a mahalla. Rather, it is a transnational. If it's one maybe in Lendikotal or Kunad or North Waziristan or adjoining Horse district. So these, it's a network interconnected with each other. So it's also at the same time
Right. I'll come back to you, Dr. Shah. Now, Mr. Khan, when we talk about this particular intelligence-based operation, as Dr. Shah has mentioned, that it is the problem that is not concerned with a certain specific locality. It is a transnational problem. Now, when we talk about this particular intelligence-based operation, now the ISPR says the weapons, ammunition, and Afghan currency were also recovered from the terrorists. Now, the Afghan currency, what does this particular thing depict? How concerning is finding of this Afghan currency from those terrorists which have been killed?
Well, from the patterns of the terrorism over the few months or over the past year, you may say that Taliban are not able to exercise their influence on the TTP inside Afghanistan, or they were not able to, exercise or they're not able to restrain them from carrying out attacks against Pakistan. But what was the reason behind that? What I personally think is that the current leadership in Afghan Taliban was also educated here in Pakistan, in the madrasas during their exile. They were here after the 9/11. So the kind of the ideological understanding between them is what is actually restraining them. But at the same time, Afghan Taliban are in search of international recognition at the moment.
But how the international community would be giving them the recognition that they desperately look forward to, because they've been keeping on violating those all promises that they made to the international community in the form of Doha peace deal, including the forming of inclusive government in Afghanistan, and also not letting the Afghan soil to be used for the terror activities. And most recently, we have seen their ban on the women education as well as their employment in the international NGOs.
Yeah. Thank you for pointing out these very important points. So what blunder Afghan Talibans are making at the moment, in my personal opinion, is that they are not complying to what the international community or their neighboring countries like Pakistan are demanding from them: to root out the terrorism from their country, to not allow their soil to be used against any other state in the region, to be not allowed their soil to be used by any third party, whether it is TTP or the Indian involvement in Afghanistan. Because we have noticed that India was very keen to build its relationship with Afghanistan, and India was the first country when it's withdraw its embassy staff from Afghanistan in the aftermath of US withdrawal from Afghanistan. However, Pakistan never did that. But now they are very keen to establish their relationship with the Afghan leadership, and this, kind of depicts that what are the Indian aims and ambitions, and how they'll be using the Afghan soil against Pakistan by framing Afghan Taliban into it, and how they will be used in this equation, they need to think about it.
Right. Dr. Shah, now when we talk about this ISPR statement, this particular intelligence-based operation, weapons, ammunition, along with Afghan currency have been recovered from those terrorists. What does it depict? Doesn't it vindicate Pakistan's position that the banned TTP had been operating from the Afghan soil, on which there was contradiction from the Afghan authorities that the TTP, the banned TTP militants were operating from within Pakistan? So that pretty much vindicates Pakistan's position that it is the Afghan interim government's responsibility to dismantle those safe havens in the on the Afghan soil, particularly of TTP.
This recovery indicates, of course, that they are on both sides. There is a cross-border terrorism, the hideouts in Afghanistan. But having said this, we must also realize that dollars, Pakistani currency, and Afghan currency, all these are used on both sides. Because of the Afghanistan doesn't have diplomatic relations or international trade through proper channels. So there is also smuggling of dollars from Pakistan into Afghanistan, which has also created, the Bloomberg report also indicates towards that. So terror financing is also there. The network is connected with each other. So this also indicates this, but we can't also wriggle out of our own responsibilities. It's a network. They have their operatives also within or on our side, because whenever they issue some threat, extortion calls to any particular person, it means that they have also links inside Pakistan on our side. That person identifies the target. Without any person here, the targets can't be identified. So we have to be also cognizant of those facts.
How basically what the Pakistani authorities need to do in order to choke that very financing that helps these sort of outfits which are hidden here that you have just mentioned on the Pakistani soil? And as Mr. Khan has already earlier mentioned, the role of adversarial countries like India. I mean, are they also trying to fan this particular thing by financing these terror outfits here on Pakistani soil?
This question is to me.
Yeah, Dr. Shah, please go ahead.
Okay. Yes, of course, all hostile elements, including India, would use such opportunities against Pakistan, would fan fire here. But having said this, Doha Agreement and all this shuttle diplomacy, still the Taliban government in Afghanistan having their diplomatic office in Doha. And Doha is one of the senior ministers of Doha. Qatar have also visited Afghanistan, perhaps persuading the Afghan government to fulfill their commitments, which they have made under the Doha Agreement, in which were also annexures that counter-terrorism actions could also be taken if the Afghan soil is used against any country for terrorism. So it is high time that the Afghan Taliban government should also realize that they should fulfill their commitments which they have made under the Doha Agreement.
Right, Dr. Shah, your point is well taken. We are honored to have been joined by another participant, Mr. Kamran Yousaf, He's senior journalist on the phone line. Mr. Yousaf, thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. According to ISPR, in an intelligence-based operation, 12 terrorists from a banned TTP have been killed. Speaks volumes that during this resurgence of another wave of terrorism in Pakistan, Pakistan security forces remain quite vigilant. Isn't it that so?
I think we have no other option but to be vigilant, because we cannot allow these terrorist groups like the banned Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan to regain foothold in Pakistan, because we have paid both human and material costs to restore law and order and establish writ of the state. And I think that was the reason, and we have seen recently during the meeting of the Apex Committee presided over by Prime Minister and attended by all the relevant officials, where a clear decision was taken that writ of the state will be established and no group will be allowed to regroup. So I believe that these intelligence-based operations, the one that you talked about, took place today, I think reflect those decisions.
Right. Now, when we talk about engaging with the Afghan Taliban, we had seen during this intelligence-based operation, the Afghan currency has also been recovered from those killed terrorists. What does it indicate? Does it vindicate Pakistan's continuous position that the Afghan soil was being used for these terror activities against Pakistan, while there was another position taken by the Afghan authorities? So how the Afghan authorities should be engaged with in order to be impressed upon that, look, this sort of findings are happening and you need to fulfill all those commitments you made to the international community in the Doha peace deal?
I think one thing we have to understand, that irrespective of what the Afghan Taliban or the Afghan interim government saying regarding the presence or the no presence of TTP sanctuaries, not even forget about what Pakistan is saying. Even there are several reports issued by the UN monitors, then other countries also talk about the presence of TTP and other groups. So, you know, TTP having their hideouts across the border inside Afghanistan obviously is certainly one cannot question. The only thing is that the Afghan Taliban, of late, they have adopted this position. They are in a state of denial, apparently, because you know, they did not want to take action, as Pakistan has been seeking for a long. As of now, how Pakistan can convince the Afghan Taliban, I think at the moment, I believe that Pakistan is trying to pursue you know, all the available mechanisms through diplomatic channels, engaging with them at the highest level. What I know, that during this Peshawar Apex Committee meeting, the decision was taken to take up the issue of banned TTP at the highest level with the Afghan Taliban leadership, in the hope that they understand that the presence of TTP and other terrorist groups not only pose a threat to Pakistan, but also the viability of Afghan government, because without addressing the issue of you know, these terrorist groups, world will not recognize the Afghan Taliban. So Pakistan is hoping that the Afghan Taliban will understand that, and if they don't, then I don't know. Pakistan may have to, you know, resort to other options, but I believe that they will still try to persuade the Afghan Taliban to tackle the TTP, and probably at the moment Pakistan is trying to use the diplomatic and other bilateral mechanisms.
Right, Mr. Yousaf, what sort of a role do you think like countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia can play in this regard? There had been an engagement between the Qatari officials. Mr. Mutlaq bin Majid Al Qahtani, the special envoy for Qatar's foreign minister, had a meeting with the acting foreign minister Amir Khan Muttaqi. And then we have seen certain reports of the withdrawal of the staff of the Saudi embassy there in Kabul. So what specific role to impress upon the Afghan Taliban these countries can particularly play?
I think it is important that all countries, particularly the Muslim countries, who have a certain leverage over the Afghan Taliban, that they make collective efforts. I think more than Saudi Arabia, I believe that Saudi Arabia in recent years, their influence over the Afghan Taliban, I believe, diminished. But on the other hand, Qatar's influence has really increased over the years because we know that Qatar hosted the Afghan Taliban leadership. The Afghan Taliban had their political office in Doha. That played a pivotal role in brokering the deal between the Afghan Taliban and the United States. So Pakistan certainly will be engaging both with Saudi Arabia and particularly with Qatar and to use their good offices to tell and convey the Afghan Taliban that they at least need to cooperate with the neighboring countries and even these Muslim countries, because without addressing the concerns of these countries in the past, that both even Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and UAE recognize the Afghan Taliban, so they have historic relationship with the Afghan Taliban. So I think all these efforts are aimed at persuading the Afghan Taliban, one, to fulfill the commitments that they made with the international community, and secondly, also make sure that countries like Pakistan, their concerns should be addressed. So I think in that context, both Qatar and Saudi Arabia can play a big role in addressing not only their own concerns, but as far as Pakistan's security concerns.
Right, Mr. Yousaf, one last question. How important and crucial is the international coordination when it comes to the major powers? Let me quote Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari said something in that regard, that we in Pakistan have to deal with the TTP. China worries about ETIM. The US is concerned about Al-Qaeda. The Russians are also focused on some groups. Then he asks the question that the terrorists coordinate their actions with each other. Why shouldn't the forces combating terrorism do the same? So better international coordination in that regard is required. Your take regarding that?
I think certainly it needs international coordination, and why it needed, because previously, after the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan, the West, particularly the US, abandoned Afghanistan. And what happened afterwards, we know that how then Al-Qaeda, evolved and other terrorist groups evolved. So Pakistan's worry is that even if this time around Afghanistan is abandoned, there is a possibility that such terrorist groups will regroup, and they will not only pose threat to Afghanistan's immediate neighbors, but also they can pose a serious threat to Western countries, including the US. So that's why I think Pakistan believes that all regional and international players work hand in hand to ensure that Afghan Taliban live up to their commitments. And if they don't, then the implications can be huge. And I think in that context, it is important what Foreign Minister or Pakistan has been pressing upon this international, coordination, because at some point or somewhere, Pakistan feels that you never know that at certain point, U.S. and other Western countries may once again forget Afghanistan, and that can create a lot of problems and complicate challenges for the regional countries.
Right. Mr. Yousaf, one last supplementary question related to this one. What single prime measure do you think could be required or could be set as a foundation for better international coordination in this regard?
I think there are several mechanisms where all key stakeholders of Afghanistan coordinate. And I believe that recently there has been a renewed push. We have seen recently U.S. Special Representative on Afghanistan visited Pakistan, so as Russian Special Envoy and other, players. And what I understand that all these flurry of diplomatic activities aim at, creating a fresh consensus and a coordinated effort. But I believe that a clear message needs to be conveyed to the Afghan Taliban that they should honor all those commitments. But I have to add, what I understand through diplomatic sources and other officials that I interact, that even Pakistan, US, and other countries probably have very limited options or leverage over the Afghan Taliban. The reason for this is that Afghan Taliban, since returning to power, they have increased their revenues, their exports have increased. So at the moment, they are not heavily relying on outside world as far as their economic needs. So that actually is an area where outside world, particularly the US and the West, feel that even sanctions cannot work. And in that context, probably the only option that the countries are left with to have more robust engagement with the Afghan Taliban, hoping that they understand and cooperate with the international community.
Mr. Kamran, Yousaf, senior journalist, thank you very much for your time, for being with us at Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Mr. Khan, now, what specific measure do you think could be the best possibility for the better international coordination when it comes to engagement with the Afghan Taliban? As Mr. Yousaf has highlighted a very important point, that their economic dividend perhaps have increased and the sanctions aren't even working. Don't you think there should be a realization among the ranks of the Taliban in Afghanistan also, where they are posed with a threat from IS, Khorasan and its nexus with other terror groups over there on the Afghan territory?
Very important question, Mr. Tehami. In my humble opinion, I think diplomacy is the only way forward. In convincing Afghan Taliban that, look, this is the problem, here you'll have to, and this is the way to solve it out. For that, we have mechanisms. The most effective regional mechanism is, I believe, under the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, under which all the countries cooperate with each other under the framework of RATS, the Regional Anti-Terrorism System. So under that needs to be activated immediately, because this particular threat is not only a threat to Pakistan's national security or a problem for Afghanistan, but this could pose implications for the regional security as well. So that particular framework needs to be activated, and through that mechanism, Afghan Talibans should be convinced that they have to deal with that, with the issue of this terrorism. And on the second level, in a zoom out picture, the framework under the United Nations, that could also be activated with the help of US and other countries in the United Nations, and they should convince Afghan Taliban, and they should ask them to act against these elements, and particularly the international involvement in the terrorist activities in Afghanistan.
Right. Dr. Shah, your take regarding this, enhancing the international coordination, especially among the major world powers, the US, China, Russia, and Pakistan itself, to engage with the Afghan Taliban?
To my mind, the President of Afghan Taliban government and United States, they were brought together through a shuttle diplomacy, in which Qatar acted as a facilitator, and international guarantees. Qatar can be cited as one of the guarantors as far as those terms were signed. So, and most of the Afghans, traders, workers, they are in Dubai and other parts of the Middle East, who are also contributing towards the economy of Afghanistan. Afghanistan also has an informal economy, which is mostly dependent on transit trade. So, to my mind, still the United States has got a leverage because of their presence in the Middle East. So the Middle Eastern countries, and in particular, Qatar, can play a very effective and pivotal role. Besides, they are also dependent on, they have mentioned recently, their foreign minister, why there is no terrorism in Tajikistan, Turkmenistan. So it means that they have some cordial relations, and they are also dependent. So the regional countries like the Central Asia countries, they can also play an effective role and can rather lend their support to the efforts of Qatar and Shanghai. So this is one of the mediums which can be used, where there has to be a carrot and stick policy.
Right. Now, the US, we have seen, Dr. Shah has repeatedly expressed his support for Pakistan to deal with this particular menace. Now, in a recent briefing, Ned Price has said that Pakistan would continue to be a stalwart partner in counterterrorism and vice versa. So when we specifically talk about the kinetic domain, of course, Pakistan has to deal with this resurgence of terrorism. In the immediate term, what should be the expectation from the US?
The main expectation, one is on the intelligence side, intelligence sharing, and propping up the capacity of the security forces and the police force. They would be requiring latest weapons like the thermal weapons, thermal imaging devices for intelligence-based operations. So this is one way. And the other way, then which has a then political dimension, that is through intelligence, the targets inside the Afghanistan can be hit through the latest technology as had been done earlier. So it can put a pressure on the Afghanistan government to come to terms regarding counter-terrorism.
Now, Dr. Shah, when you talk of the second option that you just mentioned, could you shed a little bit of more light? And could it sever relations with the Afghan interim government more in future if that option is taken?
You have mentioned the future relationship with the Afghan government. So we have to be very, very clear as far as Afghan government is concerned, clear message that our future relationship, whether economic, cultural, or other, will depend on their action against the militant and terrorist organization carrying out their mission. So it will link with that and reminding them constantly and consistently that there were certain annexures attached to the Doha Agreement that right has been given to the United States to carry out counterterrorism measures. So based on that, Pakistan being one of the very responsible and respectable member of the United Nations and ally of United States in this war. So those commitments have to be fulfilled. Otherwise, then as the spokesperson of the United States have mentioned that Pakistan has got every right, and that right is right of hot pursuit. If a soil of another country is consistently being used and my sovereignty is attacked, so one of the most essential for a state is to preserve its sovereignty, whether the attack is from inside or from the attacks external. So on that score, we have to chalk out our future strategy.
Right. Mr. Khan, what sort of repercussions do you think could be associated with the option Dr. Shah has just mentioned? If such type of violations on the part of the Afghan authorities continue to happen in future and such type of violent terrorist activities from the Afghan soil keep on happening. So how can the US and Pakistan collaborate together in order to dismantle those safe havens? And if they go for that kind of an option, what sort of future repercussions do you think would be?
As my co-panelist has already mentioned that, Pakistan has to maintain its sovereignty. So if that sovereignty is challenged either by the TTP or any other kind of elements, we need to maintain that. So for that, anything from a military operation, a need for a military operation or the intelligence-based operation, or both can be deployed simultaneously with the need. And if you remember, we have observed a strategy during a COVID of the hotspots. What are the hotspots or where the COVID was spreading like a disease in the community? So Pakistan can also identify some hotspot areas in the country, though the issue of terrorism is so large that it has now spread across the country, but still there are some hotspot areas along the Pak-Afghan border, in KPK, in some places of Punjab, in Balochistan obviously. So we need to identify those hotspot areas, and then we can devise a strategy on a tactical level, and then you can deal with that either through intelligence-based operations or the military operations, or either by equipping the law enforcement agencies that are working.
What about the hotspots that are over there in the form of safe havens on the Afghan soil? How to deal with that?
Yes, that can be dealt by by launching the operations across the border as well. Because if Afghan authorities are not taking any concrete step against those elements, then Pakistan can take into confidence the Afghan authorities, the Afghan leadership, and US and other relevant stakeholders in Afghanistan at the moment, and then they can chalk out a plan against those particular elements.
So are such type of operations covered in the international law?
I believe, I'm not an expert of international law.
There must be a mechanism.
But there must be, there should be a
pursuit.
mechanism under the international law, and such kind of operation we have observed in the other parts of the world as well, that the necessary operations are conducted across the border with the consent of the second party or the second state where the operations are being conducted. So if they agreed, and that can only happen if you pursue it diplomatically. What I said, under the realm of any international cooperation or under the realm of any international organization.
Right. Dr. Shah, you have anything to add to this particular
Yes,
thing? Please go
coming to
ahead.
this point which you mentioned, whether it's possible under international law. United States and NATO, the precedents are before us. United States came to Afghanistan under the umbrella of United Nations. So Pakistan can also use those channels, and through the umbrella of United Nations, using Security Council, taking its case before the international forums. And with the dossiers there, these are all evidences that the soil of Afghanistan was being used or is being used against us. It's a war. So now in international law and in international relations, combat against terrorism is one of the most important ingredients of factors of international law, which has now been given topmost priority. So how United Nations came here, United States came into Afghanistan, all along from 1,000 miles away, because they made up their case that the soil of Afghanistan was being used against the strategic interest of the United States. So we also have the same case here.
Right, Dr. Akhtar Ali Shah, former IGP Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, joining us on Skype. Thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. And in the studio, we were joined by Mr. Asadullah Khan, expert in international affairs. Thank you very much for your time also, Mr. Khan, for being with us on News tonight. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.